You can't really talk about Halloween without talking about the Halloween films. I didn't see Halloween till a lot later. It was really just out of curiosity because the original film especially had gotten so much praise. The first one that I actually saw was on TV was Halloween 4, and I always remember the ending of that movie at the end where Danielle Harris's character puts on the clown mask and attacks her mother. I always thought it was interesting, but at the same time, I was going, this Michael Myers guy isn't that scary, and it was almost like he was ripping off of Jason. And little did I know that Michael Myers actually came out first. And I always thought it was kind of funny how people accuse Friday the 13th of being a Halloween knockoff, but years later, as the Halloween sequels came out, they started to make the Halloween sequels more gory because of the success of the Friday the 13th series. And there's also a lot of similarities between the two series. Both Halloween and Friday the 13th had installments that deviated from the rest of the series and failed because they didn't deliver what fans wanted. So then the next film in both series came back to the formula of let's bring back Jason, and in this case, let's bring back Michael Myers. Right off the bat, the original Halloween, when I first saw it, I saw it years later, and I was unimpressed by it because it wasn't that gory, and because of the gore, it wasn't that scary. To me, what I really liked about Friday the 13th was it was like I would challenge myself to see how far I could watch the kills. Because when I was younger, when I first saw the kill in Friday the 13th where Kevin Bacon gets that spear shoved through his throat, that was a pretty hard thing to watch. So I would always cover my eyes, and it was a challenge the next time I saw it. Can I watch the full scene without covering it up, and how much of this can I watch? And it was just kind of a character building exercise. Like, if I watch this more and more without closing my eyes, I'll man up or something. I don't know. But to me, that's what scary was how gross the effects could come off. And then when I watched Halloween, whenever I watched a scary movie that didn't have as much gore, it relied more on the visuals and the atmosphere, which Halloween does. It didn't have the same effect. So when I saw Halloween years later, I was in high school. I was 17, I think, was the first time I actually saw it. And I'd grown up with the Jason and Freddy movies. So Halloween to me was pretty tame. And over the years, I've always wondered, what makes that first movie so memorable. I think a lot of it has to do with where you were when the movie came out. I wasn't born yet, but I can just imagine going to that, the theater, I guess, at that time in 1978 and watching it for the first time and being scared. It's not even the first slasher movie. Maybe it started that whole trend of what we think of the contemporary slasher movie. But even back then, what's interesting is if you put Halloween, the original Halloween, side by side with a movie like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left, Halloween still seemed like a pretty tame movie. So I always wondered what it was about the movie that was so effective and why people still talk about that original movie. It's definitely a movie that I try to watch once a year on Halloween. It's really a movie I can't picture myself watching any other time of year. I can pop in a Jason and Freddy movie any time of the year and enjoy it. But Halloween does some really good things atmospherically. It just has that really nice, crisp autumn look to it. It really captures the season. It captures, I guess, the overall mythology of Halloween. It just recaptures all of these kind of really enjoyable feelings I have regarding Halloween, because Halloween is my favorite holiday, and just like the fall, I think is my favorite time of year, just because of how pretty everything is. And I think the only other film that I would say matches Halloween or is better than Halloween in terms of the visual style is a more recent film, Trick or Treat, which I did a review for last year. Which, if you haven't seen Trick or Treat, it's like a modern-day version of Creepshow, but a good version. It's a really friggin' good anthology horror film, and that movie, better than any other, captures the spirit of Halloween. So definitely check that out. But back to Halloween, when you look at the character of Michael Myers, I don't know what it is, but to me, he's not that interesting. Sometimes, and it just depends on how it's done. I've remarked before, a lot of the times, the less you know about a character, the more intriguing and the scarier they are. But I think what makes Jason work is he has this backstory. It may not be very fleshed out, but he's a character that I could really relate to. Not not the part of him that kills people, obviously, but just the fact that he was a victim pretty much. Whereas Michael Myers, there isn't really a backstory. As a matter of fact, my biggest criticism with the whole series is that Donald Pleasence, as great of an actor and as much as he brought to the series as he did, he gave the same exact Michael Myers speech in every frickin' film he was in. Aside from that first movie, he just had nothing to do in the other movies. It was just like he gave that same speech to the cops the whole time. The beginning of Halloween H2O, when they do like an homage to that character, that's the dialogue he's given, is all he was pure evil. I mean, that's very effective in the first movie, but there's only so far you can take that. I think because Michael Myers doesn't have a backstory, that he's less interesting. And just the fact that if you know the history of the Halloween movies, of the Michael Myers character, the mask that he wears is basically, it's a William Shatner Captain Kirk mask painted white. When I think about that, it just makes it so hard to be threatened by that character. The other thing I didn't like about the original Halloween was the actors. For some reason, they all just came out kind of stiff to me. They didn't really seem like everyday teenagers like the cast of like Friday the 13th or the cast of Nightmare on Elm Street. They seemed like real characters. Didn't seem like their dialogue was written, but Halloween just felt more scripted. And I don't know, maybe it's just maybe that's the way the kids talked in the 70s. I really don't know. And Jamie Lee Curtis, like everyone calls her the Scream Queen, and I don't know, like she didn't do it for me. And don't get me wrong, I respect the hell out of her for that movie. I'm not really trying to knock her. I know it sounds like I am, but I don't know, the screams in that movie sounded kind of forced. And there are certain things that Halloween started first that I really like, but weren't as effective because I had seen them done in movies that had actually come out later. But it's like, Friday the 13th, even though it came out a couple years after Halloween, I saw those when I grew up. I didn't see Halloween till years later. So, like that one scene where Michael Myers stabs the guy with the glasses in the kitchen and just kind of does that thing where he moves his head from left to right, like studies his prey as he's hanging up on the wall. That's really chilling. But I could swear that I saw Jason do the same. Jason's done it a few times in his movies, and I saw those first. So by the time I got to Halloween, it was like, well, been there, seen that. So I know I've always talked about Halloween, and I always talk about its pros and cons, and everybody praises the crap out of the movie. And as they should. It is a pretty good movie. It's a memorable film. It ends on that cliffhanger that would have probably been more effective had they not done a direct sequel to it. But that brings me to my next point. Halloween 2 takes place pretty much the same night, which is kind of rare. Sequels generally don't take place exactly like the minute after the first one ends. And the second movie is kind of like continuing that same exact story, which I felt was interesting. I tend to like the second movie better because it's more gory. I actually think the chase scene at the end with Laurie in the hospital works better for me because she's actually more vulnerable in the second film, because when Michael Myers chases her in that film at the end, she's kind of drugged up and she's just very limited in what she can do. I like the fact that when they killed him, they burned the shit out of him. And once again, Donald Pleasance's character, the Sam Loomis character, gives the same exact speech. But I liked how in the second movie he gave some more history of Halloween and the thing with Sam Hain, and you find out that Jamie Lee Curtis is Michael Myers' sister, which in Halloween, it works in that particular movie. It doesn't feel tacked on. You can kind of believe that, okay, Laurie had this kind of screwed up childhood and was adopted because of the whole thing with her brother, Michael Myers. So that adds a depth to the story, whereas like when you find out Freddy had a daughter and Jason had this sister, those always felt tacked on to me. Halloween 3 is probably the most controversial film in the series, and a lot of people don't even count it, and a lot of people say that, well, the movie should have just been called Season of the Witch, not Halloween 3. I'm sure a lot of people know that the reason why Halloween 3 is the way it is because John Carpenter wanted to do an anthology series where every movie in the series took place on Halloween, but had a different story. It would have been an anthology series where each installment had a completely different story. Kind of like the Final Fantasy series of video games where every story is its own thing. And I think Sean Cunningham, when they were discussing the sequels to the original Friday the 13th, wanted to do the same thing. He wanted movies that took place on Friday the 13th but were unrelated otherwise. So Halloween 3 is a good movie. It's got a lot of great atmosphere. It's a great movie to see on a Halloween night. Very different genre. It's almost like a science fiction horror film with this witch. He owns this mask company, and he wants to kill all the kids around the world by getting them to wear these magical masks and have them watch the Silver Shamrock commercial on Halloween, and the masks will do all this weird kind of creepy stuff to these kids and kill them all. A really good plot. It's got robots, and it's been compared to like Star Wars, oddly enough, but it's almost like a science fiction horror movie, and it's probably one of the more graphic ones too. So I really appreciate that, and I know a lot of true fans like the movie as it is, but it does get a lot of flack because it's not related to Halloween. As a matter of fact, there's one scene where the main character, I think his name is Dr. Chalice, he's in a bar and he's watching a commercial for the original Halloween film during this like Halloween marathon. So anyway, there's that one. Then there's Halloween 4. A lot of people consider Halloween 4 one of the better sequels, and I would probably have to agree. I loved Danielle Harris in that film. She's probably one of the most believable child actors I've ever seen. And I didn't realize this, but she was Bruce Willis's foul-mouthed little kid in The Last Boy Scout, which I love. It's kind of an underrated movie, I think. But and it's really interesting that Danielle Harris came back to reprise another role in the Halloween remakes, the Rob Zombie movies, which I'll get into a little later. I know everybody has opinions on those. All in all, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, is a pretty good film, but that's where they started to kind of borrow ideas or copy from Friday the 13th because it was a little more violent. There's actually a scene where when Dr. Loomis first runs into Michael Myers, he's wearing, I think, a bag over his head, just like Jason was in Part 2, which is weird because Michael Myers' mask, as iconic as it is, it's just a plain white face, so how hard could it have been to find a mask, you know? And also, we've seen Michael Myers without his mask on. You know, Jason is disfigured. We can understand that. But I never understood why Michael Myers wore the mask. Without it, he looks like a regular guy. He really does. So that's kind of weird. Halloween 4, very action-packed film. I could go with it. You know, I was with the movie the whole way. Very entertaining. And that's another one that makes a really good Halloween movie. Halloween 5 and Halloween 6 are probably two of the worst sequels I've ever seen. They're just really clumsy. And they tried to do these really far-fetched ideas with Michael Myers that just didn't work out. Halloween 5, you got the idea that they didn't really know what direction to take it in. It has some really misguided humor. Danielle Harris returns in the movie, but they don't give her much dialogue. So it's kind of a harder film to swallow because of that. There are some really like goofy scenes. One scene I kind of liked was where the girl was in the car with the guy, with Michael Myers, who she thinks it's his boyfriend, and he's got, like, the fake Halloween mask that the boyfriend is wearing. You know what scene I'm talking about if you've seen the movie. It was a really goofy scene, but that was the one comical scene that played out. Aside from that, Halloween 5, you know, they killed off one of the central survivors from Halloween 4 in a really terrible way. They kill her off screen, I think, and generally, if a character makes it through one movie, I really hate when they kill them off in the next movie. That's kind of a slap in the face. I mean, if Tommy Jarvis can survive 3 Friday the 13th films, even though he was played by different actors, why can't one of these characters survive throughout a whole movie? So yeah, Halloween 5 was pretty bad, and what's the worst part about 5 was that it ends on a cliffhanger that they don't really explain, even in Halloween 6. Halloween 6 is just almost unwatchable. It's terrible, and I've never seen the producer's cut, but from what I understand, even though the producer's cut, the bootleg version, is a little better than the 6th film, it's like 6 eggs in one basket and half a dozen in the other. They suck either way from what I understand. And Halloween 6 is pretty violent, but in a brutal kind of, just not in a fun way, kind of like brutal in how the Saw movies are brutal. Like, you can have like fun brutal, like in the Friday the 13th series where the killers are so over the top they're funny, and then you've got this movie where you have a scene where he makes this guy's head explode by electrocuting him, and you see like all the spit and the vomit come out of his mouth, and it's just not it's disturbing. It's not fun. It's hard to watch. And then I just didn't like the fact how they tried to redo the Halloween theme with heavy metal guitar riffs, and they tried to give him this is the origin story. Like Friday the 13th had an origin story, and Jason Goes to Hell. Freddy's Dead was Freddy's origin story. This is The Curse of Michael Myers. This was the origin story, and you find out that Michael Myers was actually a kind of like a pawn in a bigger story that was going on with some cult people, and whatever. It's a dumb idea. I think a lot of Michael Myers fans would agree that it was a bad movie. And it really seemed like in the 90s when they were trying to bring back all these horror icons, nobody could get it right. Like, the fans wanted like just more of what we grew up with, and in the 90s they were, it was almost like the filmmakers were like, we know what fans want to watch, let's not give them that, let's do something completely different and screw with their heads. And they just, as the 90s went on, like especially with the Michael Myers franchise, this is what was happening. But then a little movie called Scream came out into the scene, and everybody was trying to make movies more like that. So of course you've got Halloween H2O, which many would argue is like the first true sequel, and that's actually my favorite one in the series, just because it emulated Scream, and I loved the hell out of Scream, so it has that same kind of effect. It's very self-referential, it's got a sense of humor about itself, it's got some nice throwbacks to the earlier films, but it also continues the story of Laurie Strode. Now, one of the things I really hate that horror movies do, especially horror movies, is it ignores the middle films, like it just pretends they didn't happen, which is, I guess, fine in a way because the middle films weren't that great. I mean, you could probably pretend that 5 and 6 never happened, but I still, as bad as those movies are, I don't feel like they should pretend they didn't exist. They exist for a reason. So I don't know. My take is I think there should have been some acknowledgement to them rather than let's just forget that they never happened. But aside from that, I loved the confrontation between Jamie Lee Curtis and Michael Myers. I really loved everything about that movie. It was scary, it was fresh, it was fun to watch. There were some humorous scenes that didn't really work, that were being a little goofy, but for the most part, the movie stands out to me. That one and the first Halloween, those are the two that I actually own on Blu-ray. Then we have Halloween Resurrection, which I guess is the last in the original canon of the films. And really, I probably like Resurrection more than I have a right to. It's a guilty pleasure. It's not my favorite in the series. I did enjoy it a lot when I saw it in the theaters, because that was actually the first one that I cared to watch in theaters, and I just like the humor. I mean, there are some ridiculous scenes, but they make you laugh. I mean, they're out of place, but they're actually funny. Like the one scene where Busta Rhymes comes in dressed up as Michael Myers, and then he meets up with the real Michael Myers and tells him off, and Michael Myers actually walks away. It's dumb, yes, but it's entertaining. It's funny. It gets the job done. I didn't like Busta Rhymes in the movie. I just thought the one-liners could have gone away. But that's to be expected when you have, a known rap personality act in a movie. So yeah, that's my take on it. Overall, the holy trinity of the 80s slashers, generally it's Michael Myers, Jason, and Freddy. And so that's, Michael Myers obviously was something I got into much later. And like the original Halloween, I respect. I like Halloween 2 a little more just because of the violence it has, and I just think it works a little more on a suspenseful level. I like Halloween 3 for what it is. I like 4, and then 5 and 6 I just don't like. So I guess really in the whole spectrum of Halloween movies of the original 8 films, I guess 5 and 6 are really the only ones I don't like at all. And they are pretty bad, especially 6. 6 is just unwatchable. So then we go into the Rob Zombie remakes. I mean, because even though they are not part of the same canon, they are remakes or reboots. They are part of the Halloween franchise. And when I first saw the Halloween remake, I understood that even though I wasn't a huge fan of the original, it was a movie that was a classic in its own right, and that was the one where I was like, I don't think they should remake that at all, really. When I saw it in theaters, I didn't like it at all. I thought it was not very good, and I just didn't like how the actors made the decisions they did. It was, to me, a far cry from the original. The original was all about subtlety, and this one, Rob Zombie's directing style is very in your face, and he forces you to watch a lot of these unpleasant things, and that's what I didn't like about it. Seeing it again, I like it a lot more, and I'll be upfront. In terms of the quality of the actual movie, I probably think that the remake, the Rob Zombie remake of the original film, is more effective. It's scarier for several reasons. One, like I said, I didn't really like Jamie Lee Curtis's character because she seemed too goody-goody. It just seemed too scripted. She didn't seem like a two-dimensional character. Was the Laurie in the remake obnoxious? Yes. But she seemed like a real three-dimensional teenager just doing goofy teenager things with her friends. You know, she was still a goody-goody in, you know, the fact that I believe she was still a virgin and she had high morals, but she was kind of like a horny, kind of ditzy teenager, and I bought into that a little more. I mean, yeah, there's the scene where she's rubbing bagels on her breasts, but she's just trying to get a rise out of her mother, and I really like that. I also really like the first hour of the film where you see Michael Myers as a kid develop into Michael Myers. The one thing and it's been said before, the one thing that I approach with caution in that part, though, is, you know, we see him grow up in this really dysfunctional family. I mean, as dysfunctional as a family can get, and we see him, like, literally tearing the wings off of flies and killing small, helpless animals, and he kills a little kid. He kills a kid when he's 10 years old. He kills one of his fellow classmates for calling his mom a slut and all this stuff. There's a lot of unbelievable things in that first hour, but ultimately, to watch him kind of develop into Michael Myers when he's still a kid and, you know, kill his entire family, basically, was a very chilling thing to see, especially when he's 10 years old. Then the movie goes into the remake where, you know, it actually starts to mirror scenes from the original film. I like that, but there are some things that worked and some things that didn't. The middle part was fine. I loved the kids in that, the new Tommy Doyle and the Lindsay. I liked those kids a lot. I thought they were really good. I liked where Lindsay was like, I am Queen Shiva, bow down and worship me. I love that because it was just exactly how I would think a kid like her would talk. And that's the thing, like, the kids in the original were just terrible. I'm sorry, but they just, I didn't really believe them. They just felt like they were acting in a movie because they knew they had to act. But the only thing I didn't care for in the original was the ending of the chase scene. It was just too, I don't know, it seemed tacked on to me. It wasn't very suspenseful. It got a little ridiculous. But that's probably, the Rob Zombie Halloween remake is actually my favorite of all the remakes I've done so far. Then there's Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie remake. Generally, it's not a good film, but I like the fact that Rob Zombie took it and ran with his own idea. It basically defies every rule you can think of in a Halloween movie. It defies everything. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It plays like an art house film. Very violent, but it's just a typical Rob Zombie, just... It screws with your head on so many different levels, but there's no context to it. It's brutal for the sake of being brutal. It's a very angry horror movie. So is the first one, but this one, I mean, just the way he kills people, it's really brutal for no reason. Like, he has no reason to kill an orderly in a hospital the way he does. He takes this nurse's head and basically smashes it on the table like 20 times, and she didn't do anything to him. Plus, Michael Myers is this big guy. He's huge. And it makes no sense because the kid, when he's little, is just a normal kid. So, you know, it's a weird thing. I liked how it took the character of Laurie and the character of Sam Loomis and expanded on them a little bit. It expanded, you know, Danielle Harris came back once again to play Annie. There was some really emotional stuff going on in the second one, but it's one of those movies you really have to see for yourself. So that's my take on the Halloween franchise. You know, overall, yeah, it's kind of a messed up franchise. There's no real continuity because you've got, you know, the first two movies and the third movie, which has less to do with Halloween than Friday the 13th Part 5 has to do with Friday the 13th. It has nothing to do with the series at all. Then you've got 4, which starts its own stories, and then 5 and 6, which goes on their own tangent, and they just totally screwed it up. Then you've got Halloween 7 that retcons the whole thing. And then you've got, you know, the remake. So the series, like, they just took it in all kinds of different directions. Are most of them entertaining? Absolutely. And given that the series is called Halloween, hey, it's October, so this is the best time to watch these movies. So, you know, don't take it from me, but rent a few of them. I would definitely rent the first 2, and then a Halloween H2O, and then maybe if you have time, the original Rob Zombie remake. So there you go.